One tweet, just 17 words. I never thought it would cost me everything I'd spent 15 years building. By the time I understood the weight of what I'd done, it was already too late. It was a Thursday night, late enough that the world felt quiet. I'd had 2 glasses of wine and was scrolling through the day's headlines, most of them filled with the usual noise. Another policy debate, another outrage, another opinion piece. I was tired. Not just that night, tired in a deeper way. The kind that comes from being in the same job for too long without feeling seen. I don't even know what pushed me to tweet what I did. It wasn't offensive. At least not in the way people throw around that word online. It was more of a personal observation, blunt, maybe too honest. 17 words, that's all it was. Something about leadership in tech lacking empathy and hiding behind jargon. I didn't name names, I didn't curse, I just said what I felt. I hit post and forgot about it. I didn't think twice. I'd tweeted 100 things before, some serious, some dumb, none that made a ripple. But this time, something was different. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was hot with notifications. Hundreds, then thousands, likes, retweets, comments. I saw people I'd never met quoting me, arguing over what I meant, calling me brave, reckless, stupid, bold. And then I saw the tag from a journalist. My company's name was suddenly in the mix. By 9:00 a.m., I had a message from HR. Please join an urgent Zoom call at 10. That's when the fear set in. My heart pounded. I tried to make coffee, but my hands were shaking too hard to pour the water. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. It's just a tweet. But the world had decided otherwise. The call didn't last long. They said my tweet reflected poorly on the company and that they had to take swift action. We value your time here, they said, but this has gone too far. By 10:15, I was no longer employed. I just sat there, staring at the blank Zoom screen after they logged off. Everything felt unreal. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt louder than the internet ever had. And that's how it started, how 17 words turned my entire life upside down. I stared at my laptop long after the Zoom call ended, hoping, somehow, that another window would pop up. Maybe someone had made a mistake. Maybe they'd call me back, laugh awkwardly, and say, "You're fine, we overreacted." But nothing came. I sat in my kitchen, still in the same t-shirt from last night, and watched the seconds tick past on the microwave clock. My inbox pinged, a formal termination letter. No severance. Just a reminder to return company property and to respect confidentiality agreements moving forward. By noon, I was officially unemployed. At 12:04 p.m., I made the mistake of checking Twitter again. My name was trending, not in a good way. A few people were defending me, saying the tweet was insightful, overdue, but most weren't. Some were mocking me, others were furious. A few had pulled up old tweets, analyzing them under a microscope. Words I wrote years ago were being reinterpreted, weaponized. I wasn't just a man who got fired for a tweet anymore. I was a headline, a warning, a symbol. My LinkedIn inbox was no better. A few vague, "We're sorry to hear" messages, but mostly silence. People I'd worked with for years suddenly weren't returning texts. One colleague even deleted me entirely. Just like that, I went from being a respected communications manager to someone no one wanted to be associated with. I tried to call my friend James from work. Voicemail. I texted Sarah, nothing. The silence was louder than the outrage. That evening, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker. I could hear laughter from a nearby apartment, maybe people having dinner or drinks. It felt like the world had moved on already, like I'd been erased in a matter of hours. One day ago, I was part of something. Today, I was no one. I didn't cry, not yet. I was too numb, too stunned to even understand what I was supposed to feel. But deep inside, a pit had started to form. The kind you can't name, but you know it's there. I closed my laptop, logged out of everything. And for the first time in years, I wondered what came next, when everything you'd built suddenly disappears. The first few days felt like limbo. I didn't know what to do with myself. My routine morning coffee, back-to-back meetings, late-night emails was gone. I didn't have deadlines to meet or Slack messages to answer. There was only silence. At first, I thought I'd bounce back quickly. I told myself, "You've got years of experience, someone will call." I even convinced myself the attention might lead to new opportunities. But days turned to weeks and my phone didn't ring. I updated my resume, applied to a few jobs, but no one responded. I could almost hear them thinking, "Isn't this the guy who got fired for that tweet?" The silence wasn't just from strangers, it was from friends, too. People who used to send me memes or weekend plans just. disappeared. I guess they didn't know what to say, or maybe they didn't want to be associated with me. Either way, I stopped reaching out. It was easier that way. The loneliness crept in slowly. At first, I welcomed the quiet, but then it became suffocating. I stopped opening the blinds. I slept during the day and stayed awake at night, scrolling endlessly, rereading the same hateful comments, the same threads dissecting my words like I was some case study. I felt angry too, angry at the company for letting me go so easily, angry at the people online who thought they knew me, angry at myself for being careless, for not thinking, for believing I could speak freely. But more than anything, I felt ashamed. I stopped checking social media, deleted Twitter from my phone. I even considered changing my name online, starting over completely. But it all felt pointless. I wasn't just dealing with a career loss, I was dealing with an identity loss. Who was I now without the title, the paycheck, the credibility? Some nights I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, wondering how one moment, one tweet, could unravel everything I thought I was. And still the world outside went on, cars passed, neighbors laughed, new scandals trended. I had become yesterday's news. But inside me something lingered, a small, quiet ache, not just for the life I lost, but for a voice I hadn't yet found. I spent a lot of time just lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Some days I didn't bother changing out of my pajamas. The world outside felt distant, like a show I was no longer cast in. Then one morning, I found an old notebook while cleaning the drawer beneath my coffee table. It was from years ago, before the job, before the meetings and promotions, back when I used to write. I flipped through the pages. Mostly messy thoughts, half-finished ideas, a few bold opinions I never dared to say aloud. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely hollow. I grabbed a pen and started scribbling, nothing fancy, just how I was feeling. I wrote about the day I was fired, about the silence afterward, about how something small could set your entire life on fire. It felt good, not like a solution, but like a release. Over the next few days, I kept at it, not for anyone else, just for me. There was no audience, no reaction, no fear of being misinterpreted, just words on paper, something honest, something mine. One night, I typed up one of those entries and posted it anonymously on a writing platform. I used a pseudonym, no phode. The piece was called "The Day the World Got Too Loud." I didn't expect anything from it. Maybe a few reads, maybe none. But it felt right, like dropping a message into the ocean just to prove I still had a voice. To my surprise, a few days later, someone commented, "This made me feel less alone, thank you." It was a small thing, just a single reply from a stranger, but I stared at it for a long time. My heart beat faster, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't from anxiety, it was something else. A flicker of meaning. A reminder that maybe I still had something to offer. The world had told me to be quiet, but somehow deep inside my voice hadn't died. It had just gone into hiding, waiting for me to come back for it. A week after I posted that anonymous piece, I received a message through the platform's inbox system. I hesitated before opening it. I wasn't ready for criticism, not after everything. But the message wasn't cruel, it wasn't even critical, it was kind. It read, "I don't know who you are, but I want you to know your writing felt honest in a way most things online don't. I've been scared to speak my mind, too. Reading your words made me feel braver." I read it over and over, not because I didn't believe it, but because I didn't know how to accept it. Someone had listened, not to mock or judge, but to understand. That message opened something in me. I replied, still anonymously, and we exchanged a few back and forths. I never told them who I really was. I didn't have the courage yet. But in those small, quiet conversations, I started remembering the part of me that used to believe words could make a difference. Over the next few weeks, I kept writing. Not about being fired, at least not directly. I wrote about vulnerability, about identity, about silence and noise, about the strange gap between who we are and who the world lets us be. Each post gained a few more readers, not thousands, not viral, but real people who wrote real responses. Still, I hid behind the pseudonym. One night, I sat staring at the screen, about to post something new. It was a piece I'd spent hours on, raw, personal, closer to the truth than anything I'd written before. And just before I hit publish, I paused. A question echoed in my mind. What am I so afraid of? I stared at the pen name at the top of the page. My hands trembled as I deleted it and typed my real name. It felt terrifying and freeing. That night, I posted the piece as myself. I didn't promote it, didn't share it anywhere. I just let it live quietly under my own name, like planting a flag in the ground after years of wandering. I went to bed feeling exposed, but also, for the first time in months, honest. The morning after I posted under my real name, I expected backlash, or worse, nothing. I told myself not to check, not to refresh the page every 5 minutes. Of course, I did anyway. There were a few likes, then a comment, then a message. I remember what happened to you. I thought it was unfair then, and reading this now, it confirms it. Another one followed. You're not the only one who's been punished for being honest. Thank you for saying what some of us can't. I wasn't trending, I wasn't back, but something had shifted. People were listening, not because I was loud, not because I was controversial, but because I was real. I started getting invitations to write for small newsletters and online publications focused on workplace culture and mental health. One editor said, "We want your perspective, not the cleaned-up version, but the one you've already started to share." It felt strange being asked to contribute after being shut out. I still doubted myself. I'd read over my drafts 10 times before hitting send. But every time something got published, the fear got smaller. It wasn't about revenge anymore. I didn't want to take down the company that fired me. I didn't want to go viral. I just wanted to tell the truth about fear, about failure, about what happens when you lose everything and realize your voice is all you have left. The shift wasn't immediate. I still had bad days, days where I questioned if I was just trying to salvage a broken image. But on the good days, something deeper came through, a sense of purpose. Not in a grand, world-changing way, but in the quiet power of sharing what I had lived. People began to refer to me not as the guy who got fired, but as someone with a point of view. Someone who had survived something and was brave enough to talk about it. I wasn't a pariah anymore. I was something else now, something harder to define but truer to who I really was. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I was answering emails when I saw the subject line. Panel invitation, redefining leadership in the digital age. At first, I thought it was spam. Who would want me on a panel about leadership? After all, I was the guy who got fired for a tweet, not exactly the textbook picture of professionalism. But the sender was real. A small but respected leadership conference was happening in 3 weeks. The organizer had read one of my essays and said it struck a nerve. Your honesty about vulnerability and voice in the modern workplace feels urgent, she wrote. We'd love for you to join a panel about the intersection of authenticity and consequence. My stomach flipped. I hovered over the reply button for hours. Part of me wanted to say no. I didn't feel like a leader. I wasn't sure I ever had been, but another part of me, the part that had clawed its way out of silence, whispered, "This is your moment." I said yes. The days leading up to the event were a blur. I rehearsed what I might say, wrote notes, rewrote them, deleted everything, then started again. I wasn't worried about being perfect. I was worried about being enough. The panel was virtual, but my heart still pounded as I logged into the conference Zoom room. The other speakers were CEOs, authors, consultants, people with polished bios and perfect lighting. And then there was me, in my tiny apartment, still wondering if this was a mistake. When it was my turn to speak, I froze for half a second. But then I remembered the night I posted under my real name, the first comment that said, "Thank you," the voice that hadn't died. I spoke honestly about what happened, about how one tweet unraveled my career, and how losing my job gave me a chance to find my voice again. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't dramatize it. I just told the truth. When I finished, the screen stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone said, "That was the most human thing I've heard in a long time." After the panel, I received over a dozen messages from attendees, some thanking me, others sharing their own stories. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was being seen for who I truly was. After the panel, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like a broken man trying to patch his reputation. I felt like someone who had been through fire and come out with something real, a voice forged from the hardest moments. Messages kept coming, slowly at first, then more often. People asked if I'd write more, if I'd speak at other events. Some reached out just to say, "You made me feel less alone." That hit me harder than any praise. I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who'd ever felt silenced, judged, or cast aside for speaking their truth. I began to blog regularly, not about trends or strategies, but about honesty, courage, and the cost of authenticity in today's world. I wasn't looking for fame. I was looking to connect. I found an online community, other thought leaders who weren't polished CEOs, but people who had lived through failure and come out stronger. Together, we shared ideas, pushed each other to be honest, and built something bigger than any one of us. Slowly, offers came in. Speaking gigs, guest posts, even podcasts. Every time I reminded myself why I was doing this, not for applause, but to be the voice I wished I'd had when I was fired. The old fear of being judged never fully disappeared. Sometimes it crept in, whispering doubts and second-guessing my words. But now, instead of silencing me, it challenged me to be clearer, kinder, more real. I was no longer hiding behind anonymity. I was standing in the light, not because I sought attention, but because I believed in the power of truth. The man who lost everything because of a tweet had become the man who helped others find their voice. It wasn't the plan I made for my life, but it was the one I was meant to live. Months passed and my new life as a thought leader started to feel real. I wasn't just sharing stories, I was shaping conversations. But sometimes the past would sneak up on me, uninvited and unexpected. One afternoon, I got an email from someone at my old company. They wanted to interview me for a piece about changing workplace culture, the same company that had fired me for a tweet. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Was this a trap, a way to dig up old wounds, or maybe a sign that things were finally shifting? After hours of debating, I said yes. The interview was nerve-wracking. Sitting across from a camera, I had to confront the very people and culture that once rejected me. I told my story honestly about the tweet, the firing, the silence that followed, and about how losing my job forced me to find my voice. To my surprise, the piece aired without editing out the parts that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't a perfect apology or a redemption story. It was messy and real, just like my journey. The response was overwhelming. Colleagues I hadn't heard from in years reached out to say they admired my courage. Some even admitted they wished they had supported me back then. But the biggest surprise came from within. For the first time, I felt at peace with what happened. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had softened. I'd grown beyond being the man who was fired. That interview wasn't just a chance to tell my story, it was a moment to own it, to show the world and myself that setbacks don't have to define us. I realized that the voice I found in silence was louder than any tweet ever could be. And that was a truth no one could take away. Sitting here now, I still think about that tweet, the moment that changed everything. But I don't see it as the end of my story anymore. It was just the beginning. Losing my job felt like a crash, a freefall into uncertainty and doubt. But it also forced me to look inward, to rediscover parts of myself I'd long ignored. My voice wasn't just words on a screen. It was my truth, my experience, my courage to be vulnerable. Becoming a thought leader wasn't about fame or followers. It was about connection, about knowing that when we share our stories, we're never really alone. That even when the world seems loud and unforgiving, there's power in being authentic. I've learned that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. That growth often comes disguised as loss. And that sometimes, the hardest moments lead us to who we're truly meant to be. I'm still learning, still writing, still finding new ways to speak up, to listen, and to grow. The journey ahead is unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of it. Because I know my voice matters, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever felt silenced. And that makes all the difference.